Hi everyone, and welcome to WhiteSource's DevSecOps Virtual Summit. Thanks for joining. My name is Shiri Ivtsan, and I'm a product manager here at WhiteSource. I'll be moderating today's session. I'm very pleased to introduce our 7th session of today's summit, which will be very exciting. Here with me is WhiteSource's customer, Stefan Gustafsson from SAP. Hi.
Hello.
You will be sharing great insights as to how SAP actually integrates license compliance and security into your DevOps pipeline. So, Stefan, thanks again for being here with us today and for speaking.
Thanks for having me.
So how about we just start with a short introduction about yourself, and if you could tell us a little bit more about your role in SAP.
Okay, sure, I'll do that. Hello, everyone. As I said, my name is Stefan Gustafsson. I'm working for SAP for more than 20 years now. I started out my career as a software developer at SAP, writing, I would say, mostly Java code and some web apps back then, end of 90s, early 2000s. And then over time, I graduated towards, let's say, non-developer roles. And about 6 years ago or so, I started to work as a so-called technical legal compliance analyst, one of our job descriptions. Essentially, in this role, I deal with all kinds of topics where SAP's compliance to lawful obligations can be impacted by the way we design and implement and deliver our software. So essentially, it's all about third-party intellectual property compliance on my part, if you will. Most prominently, I guess, the consumption of open source software across our portfolio is my daily business. And in this context, I was in charge and still am in charge of introducing and running WhiteSource at SAP. I guess that's why I'm here.
Probably. So it sounds like a very big challenge. I think many people have the perception that big organizations such as SAP do not really use or barely use open source. Is that the case?
I don't think that is the case. It's certainly not the case for us at SAP. Pretty confident it isn't the case for any other big organization or even smaller organization out there anymore. I mean, a long time ago, it might have been true for SAP back in the days when our product portfolio consisted mainly of products written in our own self-invented proprietary programming language called ABAP. Not sure if anyone has heard of it. But if you do, there's essentially 0 open source libraries out there. But those days are long gone for us and for everyone else, obviously, as well. And open source consumption at SAP is the norm and not the exception.
What's your take on open source usage in general in companies?
Well, I think it's a very fascinating topic with countless facets. I, for my part, happen to spend most of my working days on licensing and security aspects of open source software, but there's so much more to it. It's essentially become a public good that the society runs on. I mean, everything from hospitals to stock markets to newspapers, your Facebook account, social media, governments, everything and everyone runs on software, and the software is most probably powered by or even made of open source software. So it's a huge achievement from the software world or cultural world, even, if you will. And it's a big success story of open source software, which I guess brings lots of responsibility for everyone involved working on any of these facets in order to continue and sustain that as a success story, which it has been so far.
Yes, I guess it's one of the biggest revolutions in the software world in like the last few years. So how did SAP actually manage the open source usage before having a solution like WhiteSource? What was the process from a legal perspective and from the security perspective?
Okay. Where do I start? Well, before we introduced the WhiteSource system, we were exclusively using software from Black Duck to manage open source usage in our products. We used to scan all of our products using their tool called Protax, and we used their code center component for master data creation and approval processes. From an intellectual property perspective, there were several teams involved when it came to the approval workflow. There was our team, there was pure licensing guys, there was legal, there was security folks, and everyone had their workflow step, if you will, which in the event meant very long or longer throughput time from request to approval. Especially when it comes to scanning source code of our own products, the process back then essentially said, well, dear development team, you need to give us all of your source code or source code locations of your product. We will use this tooling to scan all your source code and then come back to you with the bill of material or inventory of open source library used and discuss the results with you from a policy and licensing perspective. And the same sort of went through for the security perspective. We sort of relied on these scan results as well and some self-declared open source component usage from development teams to enable them to assess securities based on CPE and CVE names. We still use the Black Duck suite and software today to scan certain types of products, but we don't use them for all of them anymore.
Yeah. So what do you think are the biggest challenges either felt in the past or that you have currently, and what actually prompted you to look for such a solution?
The main challenge back then, about 2015, I would say, when we started looking into other vendors, including WhiteSource, was the fact that our open source process overall didn't scale. We saw it coming. I mean, we just couldn't keep up with the speed of the development teams, the shorter release cycles, the whole shift left or DevOps idea, if you will. The growth of SAP as a company and our product portfolio also made it very challenging to pursue and continue our approach of trying to scan source code by one central team, which was us. It became pretty much obvious that we were, or would be becoming the perfect bottleneck for everyone if we were to continue the approach that we used exclusively back then. So we needed something, a solution to automate to a certain extent the IP compliance process. And for us, that essentially means empowering the software developers and development teams themselves to perform scans, to understand scan results, to act upon scan results in real time based on a set of simple policy rules based on these scan results. I guess that was the main driving factor for us to look into something else.
Yeah, I guess that the DevOps speed is one of the things that we see is one of the biggest challenges for actually all types of companies, not just large companies like SAP, but also small companies. So I think another challenge is bringing different stakeholders from your company to actually be on board with the process. So how did you do it, and what were the main concerns? How did you manage to actually make sure that they are part of the process?
Who were the main stakeholders? I mean, obviously, a big stakeholder group were all of software development teams that had to go through the formal process of having their source code scanned by a central team and then waiting on results, and essentially a process being totally decoupled from their day-to-day development work. They were hooked on this whole idea of WhiteSource and pipeline integration and automated policies from day one once we showed them. So there wasn't much to manage there other than their impatience on when can we actually get it. But there was no need to convince anyone on that front. There were more discussions, I think back of it was already 4 years ago, around the whole idea of us storing licensing and security related information of our products somewhere out there in the cloud. That was more of a discussion with stakeholders, not so much, again, development teams, but compliance and risk teams. The question became, should we really store such sensitive information outside of our own data centers? But eventually we convinced them and we convinced ourselves that we want to and have to go that way, because otherwise we wouldn't be considered a cloud company either. I mean, we're selling the cloud story to our customers as well. We're moving a big chunk of our portfolio into the cloud as well. So it would be a hard argument why we wouldn't be consuming cloud products or SaaS products from other vendors. Plus, of course, our whole purchasing process makes you guys sign a nice data protection agreement, and that helped as well.
Yeah. So now that you're is using an agile open source management solution like WhiteSource, which capabilities are the most important to you as a company?
I guess the one biggest capability, if you want to call it like this, is uptime availability of your product or service. We have integrated WhiteSource scans in a lot, the majority of our continuous integration, continuous delivery pipelines as a step, and a non-availability of your service or server would essentially right now mean the pipeline breaks, which in turn would mean SAP is not deploying the latest product version or hotfix because the pipeline failed. So again, uptime and availability of the overall solution is a big thing for us. And it becomes more important day by day because more and more teams integrate WhiteSource into their pipelines. And another important capability over the years is definitely your continuous support for different programming languages or package managers, technologies in general. Again, as an example, when we did the evaluation back then, 2015, the programming language Golang or Go maybe wasn't even a thing, or at least was not a topic for us in terms of evaluation 2015 because no one used it in-house. That has certainly changed. So you guys did add quite a bunch of capabilities over the last years in terms of programming languages, package management systems. Sometimes we trigger you because we use something new, or you come up with yourself, and that's a big part. Because we're not a Java shop or JavaScript shop or whatnot. We use lots of stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think one of the challenges for us as well is to keep up with the new open source components and new languages that are coming up, because this world keeps on being very, very advanced. Is there any specific features that you found surprisingly useful in WhiteSource?
Surprisingly useful. Well, on top of what I've already mentioned, which are like key features, the whole fact that we now have real-time insights into our own open source consumptions across our portfolio is a very useful and something even entertaining features. So with every development team out there scanning their code continuously, we can see how dynamic open source consumption really is, and the whole transitive dependency tree might change for product or project from day to day, and not just in tiny bits and pieces, but tremendously. Especially in Node.js and Go-based projects, there's sometimes big variations in between two scans of just a few hours, which is surprising. And then, of course, now that we have a global view, we have what we would call a use list, or you would call it impact analysis for libraries. So if I want to see who's using a certain library or library version, with the click of a button and a little bit patience on waiting time, I'm able to see every product and project that has this library in their inventory, and that was certainly not a thing we had before.
Yeah. Okay, can you explain to us a little bit about the automated policy approval process, SAP?
Yes, so we do have a couple of organizational policies set up in our WhiteSource account from an intellectual property perspective only. So it's essentially a license and component blacklist approach. We have a set of licenses and a set of component names or license names that we simply wouldn't accept. And if a library is under such a certain license or comes from a certain component, then you guys generate a policy violation alert. And this data is exposed via the UI to the developers. It's exposed into the CI/CD pipeline steps. They can steer their pipeline accordingly. So with policy violations in place, they're not allowed to deploy to production. Their build will fail. We will contact them and see what is the best way forward for the use case at hand. And that's as simple as that. That's our whole license-based and policy approval process for SAP and WhiteSource products. We do use this mechanism exclusively for products that we offer as SaaS solutions to our customers. For on-premise deployments and shipments, we still have more scanners in place and not just the policy approval process of WhiteSource.
Okay. And is SAP actually implementing DevSecOps? And can you describe to us how do you do that?
That's a good one. I wouldn't say we implement DevSecOps as a thing, or as you would find a definition out there. Ultimately, we and everyone else wants to build and develop software faster. However you call the concept, you can't build and develop software faster if you have tools and processes in place which are not integrated in your development processes, pipelines, operations processes, and your software release mechanisms. And that's why WhiteSource empower the teams to scan their code themselves from the CI/CD pipelines, let them control their pipeline behavior based on scan results. As I said before, if there's an IP policy violation, their build will break and the pipeline will stop. And there's similar steering mechanisms based on security, vulnerability, and severities out there. And that's the key thing, I guess, for empowering development teams and making DevOps or DevSecOps, however you want to call it, an enabler. You need to expose critical information about licenses and vulnerabilities to the teams and to their technical environments, so that they can react on it and do something with that that's actionable. And that kind of shift left of information and responsibility is what our central team and the security guys have done with WhiteSource to enable something like DevSecOps at SAP, if you want to call it like that.
Yeah, I think that we discussed the speed challenge. So I think one of the most critical ways to actually solve this challenge is sort of shift left and also have the right procedures in place in order to make sure that you have both the security and compliance part integrated into the pipeline. So exactly. Were there specific challenges with regard to this DevSecOps approach, with regard to shifting left and exposing all the information to the developers, and how did you manage to actually overcome them?
Yeah, I guess the biggest challenge I already mentioned, and it's still ongoing. So it was and still is the variety of technologies and programming languages and CI/CD environments that we at SAP are using. So we have about 100,000 employees by the end of this year, and we did a considerable number of acquisitions over the last 10, 15 years. So I guess it's unavoidable for us to be in such a technology zoo situation, if you will. But it does pose a constant challenge for us as the team that provides central tooling and central processes to deal with licensing and security, and to offer something that fits everyone's need, everyone's technology stacks, and sometimes even custom build process, or sometimes we have proprietary systems that we need to integrate into the development process. So that is the biggest challenge, and we overcome them together with you, essentially day by day, quarter by quarter, whenever we see something new that's out there, or a challenge that we need to solve. We use your APIs, or we use your expertise, or we use feature requests to give us certain things that we need to overcome these. It's a constant journey, if you will. I don't think it'll ever end.
Yeah, I guess so. So what do you think is the next big thing when it comes to open source management and security?
The next big thing. I don't know if it's really a big thing. Well, one of them definitely, but from the top of my head, I would say it's two things that are fascinating to watch how they will evolve. One of them in the field of security, how are we able as an industry to identify supply chain attacks in open source libraries very early on? I mean, take the event stream incident end of last year as an example. That was kind of a disaster, and any strategy to identify those attacks upfront before they infect you is something that needs to be looked at. In terms of IP compliance, I don't know. I mean, when you think of it, the world would really only need a few open source software licenses, but we currently have too many, or more than anyone can count, which serves almost nobody. Well, a certain extent you, obviously, as a tool vendor, but it makes managing license compliance for open source software really hard and unnecessarily hard, I guess. So who knows, maybe in our lifetimes we can witness a move towards usage of only a handful of well-crafted licenses opposed to hundreds of flavors of open source licenses, some of them being older than the people who actually write open source code today.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree regarding the licenses. It's a very big challenge. Great. Do you have any last tip or anything that you want to add for, you know, security people or compliance people that will probably be or have the same way did with WhiteSource or with any other tools, like any tip that you want to give them?
A tip? Oh, that's a good one. As I mentioned before, this whole compliance thing from a tooling perspective is and will always be a journey. So there is no perfect tool out there. There's no golden key, but it must always be a fit between you, your company culture, and the vendor. And I guess that's the biggest tip I can get for folks who are doing feature evaluations or solution validations of open source licensing compliance tools out there. It's not just today's tools capabilities, but it's also being able to have a good working relationship with the vendor of your choice.
I agree. And I think between WhiteSource and SAP, we definitely found a very good way together with our customer success team to have this sort of, you know, vendor-customer relationship.
Yes, for sure, exactly. Well, that's why I'm here and doing this interview, right?
I guess so. Before we sign off, I just wanted to let you know that we've had a very interesting session with regards to DevSecOps today. So definitely I urge you to go look for them. And they will be available on demand as well as this session. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.